integrity, they act according to their morals and how they feel what is right and what is wrong. Okay, what is something that is considered immoral? All right, so this is a tough one. I get murder a lot on this one. Is murdering someone is immoral. So there's a murderer, kill somebody. Maybe it was an act of whatever. Wasn't premeditated. It was just, I hate you, and murdered them. And they're like, shit, whoops. End up in jail. Now they're on death row. They're on death row. Should they get the chair or whatever they do? The question is that right? That we murder a murderer? I don't know. What's your moral value on that? See? So what's immoral? An eye for an eye? This is where it kind of gets complicated. And this is why there's no such thing as black and white in humanity, because that's just everyone's values and morals are so different. So, and then do people disagree about what is moral and immoral? Absolutely, all the time. And what are some examples? Okay, so I think abortion always pops up on that one. Again, death penalty is one. Infidelity, all kinds of different ones. So there's all these different lying, right? Lying is it morally right to lie? Remember, I'm on that honesty kick over here. Okay, so these are some things we really want to think about. So what are some other examples you might think that are moral and immoral? Okay, so. And this is the idea behind this is a practice to kind of understand, where do you stand on all these? Where do you stand? I don't know. You're going to have to figure that one out. All right. So when morals are codified into a system, they are called ethics. So you might have an ethics class later on. I'm going to give you kind of a few things here and see if this works for you. So ethics are standards of conduct that people are held to. You would think that there's more ethics in this world than there really are. Unfortunately, we're not seeing it as much as we probably should, especially people of, power or whatever. Okay, so used in school, business, and other organizations. So there's ethics that we use, like as a teacher, the ethics are, there's all kinds of ethics. I guess there's a lot of things that you could do really terribly as a teacher, whether it's, dating students underage and things like that. Businesses, are you doing shady dealings with money, and other organizations? So there's a certain what do you call it? In the medical field, there's a lot, especially obviously in the medical field, HIPAA, where we don't divulge certain information about patients. There's certain ethics that you follow that you're just like, that's just the right thing to do. Like, why would you do anything other than that? Like, sometimes you go, why does that have to be in place? But we follow these as, people of whether school, business, organizations, so that we're held accountable on a certain level to say, look, these are the ethics in which I follow, right? And that's morals that are codified into a system. Okay, that's what an ethics is. Okay, so there's also it's different from laws. Like, there are certain laws that you're not allowed to do a thing, obviously. But the ethics is different from a law. It's a code of ethics that we follow. Okay, because let's be honest, can laws be unethical? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Laws, unfortunately, are not perfect. Sometimes they are inspired financially. Sometimes they're inspired politically. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're like, oh, thank God for that law, right? Like, I don't know. There's all kinds of different laws that you could be thankful for. And then there's some where you're like, that's a weird law to have, right? So we can think back to slavery and things that were totally okay. And at the time, like, oh, you could totally do this stuff. And you're like, now you think about it and you're like, oh, that's unethical. That's not right. But they were laws, right? Anywho, so yes, absolutely, laws can be unethical. But ethics is a whole different thing. It's morals that are codified into our system to keep people accountable, right? To hold people like me in positions of, information or whatever, accountable for their behavior. I'd like to think there was more ethics out there in systems, but it's a different story. Okay, so some of you are rolling your eyes at me. That's okay. All right, so on page 44, I want you to look at some examples of different types of differences. Sorry, I got distracted. So go ahead and take a look at that and just kind of see, where you might see some differences here in that. Okay, so next I'm going to go to page 45, and I'm going to talk about the different ways in which the government is coded, right? So governmental codes for morals and ethics. Okay, so the first one is libertarianism. All right, so libertarianism is for individual freedom. Okay, individual liberty. I'm going to say that term instead. So libertarianism, individual liberty. We have utilitarianism. Oh my God, I can never say this right. All right, so the idea behind this is that it's a general happiness, or we try and minimize unhappiness. That's the ultimate goal here. Okay, so when you hear those words, you're like, okay, libertarianism is for my individual liberty. Utilitarianism is for general happiness. We're just trying to keep people from being, overly unhappy. Okay, egalitarianism is equal justice and opportunity. Okay, egalitarianism, equal justice and opportunity. Okay, and we'll talk about that in the Declaration of Independence. Give me a minute. Okay, so religious values are based on faith and spiritual truth, what people hold, to be their spiritual truth. And then prima facie values, again, that's going to be in our quiz. It's the universal ethical values considered to be self-evident and obvious to rational individuals in every culture. So when we say murder is wrong, well, it's like, well, duh. Like, obviously, that's a prima facie value. There's certain values, that people say, this is obvious. These are certain ethical things, that you just shouldn't do, right? So anyway, so just maybe think of what some prima facie values might be for our culture. Again, murder isn't one of them, is one where you're like, okay, that's wrong. Okay, stealing, cheating, things like these. Things that we're like, okay, well, that's obviously just not right. Okay, so that being said, so religious values are we're going to talk about religious values in the prima facie in comparison here, where religious values is an ethical system based on spiritual truth, right? Spiritual truth and principles of, loving God and one's neighbor, right? So when my mom was having her conflict, her religious values kind of ended up leaning more again towards that love, where, she loves God and she loves her neighbor or cousin or nephew or niece, right? All right. So religious values are based on, loving God and one's neighbor. But a prima facie value is a system of universal ethical principles. So religion is on its own accord. Not all people have that same religious view and understanding. But when we talk about prima facie values, it doesn't matter your religious belief or however, we come together as, a whole in a society to say, okay, universally, these are some ethical principles such as honesty, respect for others. And these are things that are considered self-evident and obvious to rational people. Rational people. Okay, so most people would say, okay, murder is bad. Ta-da. Okay, and this is for like all cultures. All right, so that the key here is like rational, because then there's some people who are out mass murdering people. They're not considered rational. There's other things going on. However the case, we wouldn't hold their values as the whole, right? That would definitely be a fallacious thing to assume the whole because of one person for whatever reason. Okay, so is honesty a prima facie value? Could you say that universally all people value honesty? I don't know. I'd like to think so, but I'm being proven otherwise. I don't know. How do you feel? Could it be the case that we all truly, as a whole society, as a rational person, hold honesty to be a prima facie value? That just so happened to be later in my notes. In no relation to me actually picking that as a value for myself. But anyway, so I kind of want you to, in a sense, think about to yourself, maybe you can have this discussion with friends, family, or cat. My cat's back here, so you can't see him. Anyway, maybe you're having these discussions with them where I would like you to ask. My cat won't really have an answer for this, but are some governments based on religious values? Okay, are some governments based on religious values? Have you ever looked at a dollar or a coin? Someone say yes. Okay, are religions based on prima facie values? I don't know, right? Depends on who, I guess, who you ask, and what part. Are they extremist in this religion or whatever? They might actually say yes or no. I don't know. So I think I kind of answered that question. But are religions based on those values, which are ethical principles that I think majority of cultures could say yes or no to. Okay, real quick, I do want to read this part in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that we as a country stand by and say, okay, we declare this in our independence. This is what we say for all people within America, right? And it's actually in the book here, page 45. And this is that line that I don't know if any of y'all in history class in like 8th grade had to memorize and say it in front of class. Okay. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? Self-evident truths. That's the prima facie values. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator. Are some governments based on religious values? Maybe. Hint, hint. All right. That they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Born with these rights. We were born to have these rights. That among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So whether or not my mother, believed that, my cousin, whether or not she went by her religious values or her governmental values, she could still see, if she went by this, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if she's seeing the happiness for my cousin, she could go, oh, well, that's what America stands by, right? Or, her love value in her religion. So they all kind of do this, right? Makes it a little muddy. But you can see how values really resonate all over. And this is why we have arguments. Simple and simplistic values, you can take a look at those. Super easy. If it's simplistic, it's too questioning. It's overly simplified. It means sometimes believing one school of thought is always right. So when we have simplistic values, those aren't the best values to have. They're overly simplified, and it's too much making that statement that only one school of thought is right. That's not always the case. All right, so a simple value is a plain, basic, uncomplicated form or nature and design without much decoration or ornament. Like when we make that statement of honesty, and the other ones that I mentioned, I'm blanking right now. Hold on. I'm not going to go back and redo this video so y'all get me in my my goofy state here. Justice, education, safety, meaningful work, patience, these are all values, right? So, okay. Anyway, those were just some simplistic values. In case that pops up somewhere, we got it here. So my question is, are we always moral? Are we always moral? I don't know. Let's think about this. So we have an ideal value of who we want to be and what we want to be and who we want to be, right? So we have an ideal value of who we want to be as a person, okay? And that's considered to be right and good. That's an ideal value. But the real value is considered to be right and good that is acted upon in one's life. So we might have these ideal values of being these great environmentalists. We're saving the world. We're doing everything we can in every step of the way. That's my ideal value. But the real value is like, bitches, I'm poor. I can't afford half the organic things that are out there. Wouldn't that be kind and nice and wonderful? I'm doing my best. Maybe it would be the difference between, driving that electric car and the one that I can afford. So that's the thing, is we want to be ideal in these values, but then we end up just kind of going, well, what's the real value? What can I really do to achieve at least somewhat of the value in which I'm believing in, right? I am the worst. I will be honest with you. Absolutely. Okay, so we seek to use ethics when we argue. So what I want from you is, when you do arguments and you make these statements, I want you to seek those ethics. I want you to seek these things that you value, these things of honor, I guess you would say. We don't bullshit our reasons, and we come up, and we don't come up with 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 fake evidence. Let's be honest. We don't come up with these like things that come out of nowhere because it pushes our point of view, or it goes with the thing that we're trying to say. That's not what we do. We don't argue just to say, hey, I'm right. We argue because we have this evidence, we have these facts behind us that make the true statement and say, hey, this is true and real because these are the facts and these are the statements. I'm not making shit up just so that I can, be right about it. That's not the point. An argument is based, again, on a claim that is backed by reasons, right? And we end up with the conclusion because of those reasons. And that's the biggest thing I want you to do. And, we all know what fake news is. And I know some people are like, oh, there's this and there's that. Let's just call bullshit on that. If it is not backed by facts and truth and honesty, whatever, we have to call it for what it is. And that's the thing we need to face, And, there was one semester where I was making a bunch of jokes about, conspiracy theories and this and that and trying to validate them. And I couldn't. And it was impossible. And that was the joke. And now it's become a thing where people are legitimately dying over these conspiracy theories. I'm like, all right, hold up. It was funny at first. It's not funny anymore. We really have to understand, like, these arguments that we are making. Where are they coming from? What is really, truly behind them? And, I'm absolutely totally willing to listen and respect and where these opinions are coming from. Like, that's cool. I totally see where you're coming from. I see where that struggle is because of these values that you hold. Totally get it. And, willing to, my question is, we need to be willing to adjust our beliefs in the face of new evidence, right? So, someone once said that this was a pink highlighter marker. Forgive me if anyone has color blindness and you cannot see this color. That's a terrible example, but I'm just going to go with it. Someone kept saying that this was pink, this was pink, this was pink. And you're just like, I don't know how else to tell you short of showing you that this is not a pink highlighter. Like, how can I change your mind on that without, aside from literally showing it to you and handing it to you and letting you hold and see and look at it. And so at some point you'd have to be able to go, oh, I see what you mean, and you're right. It actually is a yellow highlighter. It is not pink, despite what, someone told me. Now that I see it and it is evident in front of my face, I could tell you, yes, you are truly right. There it is. It sucks. It's not what I wanted to believe. It's not really the value. I value that pink one way more than I value this one, but I can't deny the fact that this is right here in front of my face. Like, this is where we have to start changing and understanding, like, damn, you're right. And I've had students do it to me, right? And there was something one student said about some argument I was making, and I got emotional into it. And at one point they messaged me, we talked about it, and I was like, dang, you're right. You're absolutely right. And so I had to change both my beliefs and understanding. Again, it's like the guy with the bullhorns. At one point, I would have been like, screw that guy for wanting organic food. He should not deserve that, or whatever, I would have said. But now I can look at it and go, you know what? Deserving is not the argument here, right? We talked about that before. It's, in jail you get your religious rights, and thank God he gets his religious rights. Whether or not I believe he deserves it is not the point at all. The issue at hand is, does he get his religious rights in jail? And yes he does. So, right? So this is where at some point we have to break away from that emotional attachment and go, I got to look at this in a different light. Okay, so we're going to pass over the plagiarism thing. Y'all have done it in English too. I don't need to go over it again. If you're copying and pasting someone's words and not giving them credit without quotes, brah, that's plagiarism. Okay, like, that's pretty simple. Okay, so really quick, let's go to page 50 and 51. We're going to talk about how are we following our principles and adhering to our standards, right? We're going to hold these values, but to what extent? The question is, I want you to take a look on 50 and 51 of the different types of tests, and there's only 4. And normally what I would have you do is go into groups and go back and forth and teach each other these different tests, but I can't do that because we're not in Classy Poo. So instead, I'm just going to go over them really quick and kind of help us understand the ways in which we can test our principles, right? And how how they affect both sides. And these are really good ones. And one of my favorite ones is the role exchange test, especially. I remember my husband said something about some political thing, and he was, I don't know, mocking it or whatever. And I was like, first of all, how would you feel if someone else was saying that about, our side or whatever? I can't remember what I said, but we have to think of these things whenever we make these, these statements, these aggressions. Stop and go, what if someone's doing that on our side? So let's start with the role exchange test. I'm going to read it really quick. I know y'all can read just fine, but I'm going to walk you through it. So the role exchange test asks you to emphasize with the people who will be affected by the action you take. How are these people affected? And what if it came back and they did it to you, right? Okay. So you try and see the situation from their point of view. Sometimes that's really hard, but it's very important, okay? And again, even though I argue with my family members, I do try and see where they're coming from. I absolutely feel it. I do. I get it. It's hard, but I do understand. So you ask yourself how the others affected by your decision would feel and what consequences they would face. All right, so vice versa. So you also ask whether it would be right for the other person to take the action if you were going to be the one experiencing the consequences of the decision. Okay. Using your imagination, you change places with the person or persons who would receive the effects of your decision. In short, you decide to treat the other person as you would want to be treated in his or her place. So with my family members, normally I don't really say stuff and I don't argue and I don't say, you're wrong. But at one point, and I had to do this in the argument, I had to stop and think of where they were coming from. And I'm thinking, how would I want to be approached if, and it's, of course, people call me out on social media. Love it. And I accept it. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're right. I'm cool with that. And that's what you got to do, right? And so with them, it was a point where I would make a mention and say, okay, I will have to argue on this, and this is why. And again, I love you very much, but this is why. This is a fallacious statement. And I would, I would hate to see you constantly, making statements like this that are not who you are based on the principles I know her to have. And, as a loving person, for her to make these statements, I'm like, I'm gonna have to argue that. Like, I gotta say something. As I approach her as I wish somebody would approach me in my cases. If ever there's a time I'm saying something that, they're like, no, you're all wrong, and your argument is incredibly fallacious, and let me tell you why, but I still love you, right? So, should I have done it? Probably not. But did I do it? Yes, I did. Okay. For example, you see, this is a good one. I like this example. You see your brother's girlfriend out with other men. You hesitate to tell him because of the hurt it would cause and because you feel it's not really your business. All right. However, you do the role exchange test and you decide to tell him because you realize you'd want to know if you were in his situation, right? Like, I'd want to know if I'm making fallacious, ridiculously ignorant statements online. Call me out on it. I will totally accept and go, you know what? You're right. My bad. Okay. And then I change my values and my understandings and my beliefs, and I go back and go, okay, I see now where I was wrong. Okay. That's the rule exchange. Okay, so the universal consequences test itself is, it focuses on the general results or the consequences of an action you might take. All right, you imagine that you would, you imagine what would happen if everyone in a situation similar to yours took this action. Would the results be acceptable? Universal consequences test. So under the universal consequences test, if you would find it unacceptable for everyone in a similar situation to take this action, then you would reject the action. Okay. So for